having me here today. It's a pleasure to be on with KVOD. And hope you'll enjoy this quick tour of lower downtown Denver, one of the most successful historic districts in the country. And a fascinating story of how Skid Row, I bet some of you can remember it as Skid Row, has been transformed into a very prosperous, thriving neighborhood. This is what it looked like before the gold rush. Arapaho Indians camped on the site here on the South Platte River. And maybe you see their teepees in the background. In those days, they described the Platte River as cool, clear, and delicious. I haven't tried drinking it lately, but I don't think that's still true. Here are the Arapaho women erecting teepees. This is a diorama at History, Colorado, 1200 Broadway in Denver. One of many dioramas, I should add, showing accurately that women did all the work here. Women would trim these log pines, teepee pines they were called, lodgepole pines. They would erect them, they would design this and put them up. They said they could put them up in half an hour, or if the buffalo were running or that somebody with utes were after them, they could take them down in half an hour. And yet we've called these women ignorant squaws today, which is far from the case, of course. But when you see that teepee design of theirs has come in very handy for places like DIA, where the architects just rediscovered that the teepee shape there it's cheaper, it's much more flexible, and it's actually much better than a flat roof building. It's also, as many of you have been into DIA, it's translucent. You can actually read in there without any electric lights. This is how it started, with a flash in the pan in the South Platte River and Cherry Creek back in 1858 in the summer. The Russell boys from Georgia, who were experienced miners in Georgia, where the original gold rush was, and also had been to California. They knew where gold was, and they found it on the site of what's now Denver. Can you see some gold in that pan? A few sparkles there. They took out about $200 in the first week of prospecting along the Platte. Gabriel, how do I get this little announcement the meeting is being recorded away from the image, or can I? Oh, there we go. This was one of about 35 different guidebooks on how to come west to Colorado and make your fortune. Why attend Dad's farm back in Kansas or in Kentucky in the store there or somewhere back east when you could head west to Colorado, strike it rich. And you could buy this book for 50 cents then, and it would tell you how to make your fortune. But today, if you can find one of these, I think they sell for $500, $600 a piece. These little guidebooks that were published by the thousands, but most of them are thrown away. And many people disappointed, thinking they were going to strike it rich. The gold would be easy to find here, which was not always the case. This was the man who founded what's now Denver, General William H. Larimer Jr., a land developer, a speculator really from Pennsylvania who came out west, wrote a great account of early Denver, and he described it as having nearly perfect climate, said if you moved to Denver, you would live forever. The climate was so wholesome here. He also built a log cabin on what's now Larimer Square and founded the Denver City Town Company November 22nd, 1858. And here you see Larimer after he grew his beard. Here's that site at 15th and Larimer. Today it's the Granite Theater, if some of you know that building, or the Granite, not theater, but Granite Hotel, where the Comedy Works in the basement last I checked on it. He claimed it was the first house in Denver. Was it? Or were there other people here earlier? This photographs in La Casa de Manuel, this painting in La Casa de Manuel shows accurately Spaniards seeing the site first where Cherry Creek flows into the South Platte. Manuel keeps this painting up in his little restaurant, La Casa de Manuel at 28th and Larimer, as a reminder that General Larimer was not first. There was actually a settlement on the site of Denver in 1857, a year before Larimer arrives, called Mexican Diggings, where Spanish-speaking people found gold, started digging it out. And nobody knows for sure, but probably what happened here is what happened in California. If gringos showed up and found any Spanish-speaking people with gold, they would chase them off and, of course, not rename it for the Spanish name, such as Mexican Diggings, which Denver was originally called, changing the name to some Anglo later discoverer. And so today we do not have the Mexican Digging Broncos or the Mexican Diggings Nuggets. We have the Denver Nuggets, of course. Here's Little Raven negotiating in LoDo, and I think this drawing is actually pretty accurate of Larimer and Little Raven trying to keep peace here originally. Little Raven actually welcomed folks to Denver, said they would share what little water there was, what little wood there was on the scrawny cottonwoods here. And he didn't particularly go for this square, stuffy house. He'd much rather have an airy, a lighter, a teepee. Here's another of those dioramas at History Colorado that we talked about. And off to the upper left-hand side there, can you see Cherry Creek? And that's what is Larimer Square today there in the center of this photograph. It's actually pretty accurate. It was done in 1860, in 1930s by the WPA of 1860 Denver. They had photographs of the buildings and a pretty good feeling for what was actually there. So I think these are pretty accurate. They also accurately show some Indian teepees there in the background with some Arapaho Indians still camped on the site. Here's a picture of Cherry Creek, and off to the right there, you can see the office, the first office of the Rocky Mountain News. Editor William Newton Byers built that in the middle of Cherry Creek, hoping to reconcile the town of Auraria on the west side of the creek, where you can see the Tremont House in the distance, and Denver City on the east side of the Platte. That printing office was later swept away in the flood of 1864. Here's the interior, and again, I think it's a fairly accurate drawing by a newspaper writer from back east of what Byers' office looked like. That's him on the right there with that meerschaum pipe. And the flyers on the background are interesting. See the Vigilante Committee? Byers was a big supporter of this, trying to bring law and order to Denver City, which was filled with a lot of what he called bummers. There was no sheriff out here. There was no jail. So a lot of riffraff or a lot of bummers show up. And he is running ads in the newspaper, Bummer Jack Jones, better get out of town or else. And as a result, this office was invaded at least 3 different times. He was kidnapped, but barely saved from being lynched himself. Judge Lynch was put in charge of bringing law and order to town. And here is a hanging from the Larimer Street Bridge. I think this was a pioneer Irishman, L.H. Musgrove, if I'm remembering the name here. And you see what his last request is here before being hung from the Larimer Street Bridge? It was for one last smoke, not for a prayer, not for a letter to his sweetheart or his wife or his mother or whatnot, but for one last smoke before he was, as the Rocky Mountain News put it, jerked to Jesus. I thought that was fairly charitable. He might have been jerked the other way. Hope you can all see Mademoiselle Carlista there up in the sky on a tightrope walk, rocking across Larimer Street, the 1500 block. She did this nightly in the Criterion Saloon here for a special performance, and you can see the whole town it's turned out. But notice there's nobody there underneath to catch her with a net. They're all cleared away from where she might fall if she did. But this is the beginning of the Denver Center for the Performing Arts, and Denver is an arts venue. Her famous Mademoiselle Carlista's tightrope walk. She also sang and danced in the Criterion Saloon. Dennis Gallagher, late city auditor, state senator, state representative, city councilman, loaned me this picture of his granddad, who's there behind the bar with his suspenders, looking kind of stout and happy like Dennis himself. And next to him is Mr. Madden, This is Madden's Wet Goods in what's now LoDo. And he was, like many Irish immigrants, set up a saloon, which was a center. Can we go back, Gabe, just one? Like many Irish immigrants, this was a center for the Irish folks. They'd come in, have a drink, get registered to vote. And also Madden would go out in the neighborhood, house to house, knocking on doors, kissing the babies, saying hello to the ladies, hiring your worthless son, giving him a job with the city or whatnot. Apparently he also put up the housing here. I found there were 216 Democrats registered at this little address at 1120 Larimer Street. So he apparently took in the homeless as well. And of course, those votes came in on election day, where Madden was always reelected for Denver City Council. Denver was a transportation hub from the beginning. This is the Wells Fargo building. It's still there in downtown Denver in LoDo at 15th and Larimer Streets. The second story is now gone, but those fine round arched windows are still there. And this was the first stage stop. And once the stage stops here, Denver City becomes the hub, not Auraria, not Boulder, not Fort Collins, not Golden, but Denver City, in that it's the stage stop. Just up the street at 16th and Market was this bank and mint. Clark Gruber and Company, the first bank and the first mint in town, where they would buy up gold dust and mint coins. Up in the upper right-hand corner, can you see that Pikes Peak $10 gold bill? Doesn't look much like Pikes Peak, does it? But these actually had more gold in them than the federal gold dollars. So they're very valuable. Today, I think they bring $100,000 or more if you can find an uncirculated Clark Gruber and Company mint, which they have on display, by the way, at History Colorado. Thanks, Jonathan, for your excellent slide selection here. And Jonathan is showing you a picture of Larimer Street and how supplies came in. You see that ox team there hauling in a boiler, probably for some mine up in the mountains or maybe some building in Denver needed a hot water boiler, steam boiler like this. And is the city going to grow when you have to transport something 700 miles by ox team, any kind of heavy equipment or supplies like this? Denver stagnates in its isolation 700 miles from wherever equipment like this would be manufactured in San Francisco or St. Louis or possibly Kansas City. The answer, of course, is a railroad. You're not going to grow if you're bring everything in by freight ox wagon like that. The answer will be get a railroad. But Denver gets bypassed. The Union Pacific Railroad, surveying its route from Omaha to San Francisco, considers Denver. They actually tried a route over Berthoud Pass, but got a snowstorm buried them in a blizzard in October, and they figure what's it going to be like later on when winter really comes. So they decided to go through Cheyenne, where you have a much lower pass than Berthoud Pass. The South Pass, Wyoming, I think is something like 7,000 feet instead of 11,000 something feet. And when Cheyenne goes in as the capital, as the center, as the rail hub for the UP in Wyoming, half of Denver actually moved up to Cheyenne, figuring that was going to be the Rocky Mountain metropolis. To the rescue comes former Governor John Evans and others who say, if the railroad will not build to Denver, we will build to the railroad. So they found the Denver Pacific Railway, start building a line from Denver up to Cheyenne. And once you have that connection to the Transcontinental Railroad, Denver really begins to boom finally. It had stagnated in the first decade, never getting past about 5,000 people. But after the railroad arrives in 1870, by 1880, it's 35,000. By 1890, Denver is 106,713 people with a railroad and mining boom. Later, the Denver Pacific is swallowed by the Union Pacific. Here's a great flyer for the Denver Pacific, and town's named for the officers along the way, Hughes and Evans and Pierce and Greeley and Carr and Ogden. And that little steam locomotive transforming life in Denver City. The Denver Pacific arrives first, then the Colorado Central, then the Kansas Pacific. And here's an early version of Union Station there you can see on the far left. And Denver beginning to boom as a railroad town. It was a lot easier than riding a horse or a donkey or a burro out here to come by train. You can see these wonderful, comfortable chairs, big picture windows. You could even open these windows and fire away at buffalo or antelope, whatever you saw out there on the plains. And as the Kansas Pacific might tell you, it comes here from Kansas City, St. Louis, and dead ends here in Denver. Later, it too, like the Denver Pacific, is absorbed by the Union Pacific Railroad. Here's the first version of today's Union Station. These wings that you see here with that nice rhyolite stone, those are still there, but the center section, of course, has changed. But we used to have a great little plaza in front of Union Station, which has now been brought back. I trust you've all been down there to see this and to see those water fountains, which on a day like today, the kids are really enjoying this big plaza filled with water fountains. Gabriel and I are going to go cool off after the show, right, Gabriel? In front of Union Station, Mayor Spear in 1904 erected this welcome arch, said it would stand here forever to welcome newcomers, visitors, investors, tourists, and also the Democratic National Convention of 1908, the first national political convention held west of the Mississippi River. And so that welcome arch does welcome people. It stood there until the 1930s. Mayor Spear said it would stand forever. Forever is not long in Denver. Mayor Begold tore this down in the 1930s. He called it an impediment to the automobile because cars racing to get passengers picked up or delivered at Union Station kept crashing into the gates here. So they tore it down. Today, Dana Crawford and others are hoping to re-erect this welcome arch as an impediment to the automobile, which was what it was called by Mayor back in the 30s. The Oxford Hotel, of course, is still there. Now Denver's oldest surviving hotel at the 17th in Wazee. Here's the original version of Union Station. You see this great mansard roof, Second Empire style, very ornate. Today, we would love to see this back again. The building off to the right there, the streetcar stables, you can see the streetcars coming out of there, is now Streetcar Lofts. That building is still there. The Venice restaurant is down on the first floor where those doors are open for these little horse-drawn streetcars. They come to Denver in 1871 as Denver is beginning to boom with the railroad boom, and the city spreads out along streetcar lines. They ran out in every direction. Highlands, Elyria, Glorville, Swansea, Park Hill, Montclair, University Park, Harmon, South Denver. And it was only a nickel ride and a very great system we had in those days. You get off the train at Union Station, walk across Wynkoop Street and board one of these nickel streetcars to all the neighborhoods of the city, even out to Littleton and Golden and remote suburbs. Here are the streetcar lines as of 1893. Take a look at northeast Denver. You'll see the majority of the lines going up there, the oldest part of the city. And then out northwest Denver, I don't know if you can read this map, but it says the Jesuit College, which of course is Regis College today, Sloan's Lake, you can see, and some development in northwest Denver. Next to nothing in southwest Denver, where you see the one little neighborhood of Barnum. Phineas T. Barnum, the great Barnum and Bailey circus man, planted this neighborhood. He claimed the climate was so healthy, you would live there forever. And if you go out to Barnum today around Federal and Alameda, you'll see a lot of older folks that are hanging on. Out southeast, about all you see is the line to the University of Denver, which was founded by the Evans family, and they're the principals behind the Denver Tramway Company. So they made sure that you could ride a streetcar out to DU. I love this old postcard that I found at the Denver Public Library, showing one of these horse-drawn cars, the Sherilyn Trolley. If some of you live out south in Inglewood or Littleton or South Denver, you may know there's a replica of this down in the Inglewood City Hall. Dear Gertrude, some time ago, several of the girls and I went out to Fort Logan. We saw this funny little horse car at the end of the South Broadway car line. The horse pulls the car to the top of a very steep hill, then gets in the front end of the car and rides down. I am feeling very well again. Love, S. July 9th, 1904. Now, I researched, Gabriel, I researched this horse for you. That horse's name was Old Dobbin. And there were actually 6 different horses that all had the same old name. And the old timers tell me Old Dobbin was wonderful. When he saw someone waiting a streetcar line, he would stop automatically. Now today, RTD is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to train its drivers to stop when they see somebody waiting along the car line on Broadway. Wynkoop Street today, the heart of LoDo. And you can see this great warehouse road. This is right across from Union Station, generated, of course, by the station and by train traffic and train freight coming in. And we're very lucky we have this. It's the cornerstone of the lower downtown historic district. All of these have been preserved, restored. One is in the foreground here is the Wynkoop Brewing Company. In the background is the Mercantile Building, which housed the little tattered-covered bookstore. And on down the way, you're looking at the close to Cherry Creek Bridge there. But this is now a booming heart of the lower downtown historic district.
We had one question, did the welcome arch say Mitzpah on the other side? We might have to go back a few slides.
Yeah, good point. About someone asked about the Mizpah welcome arch, and on the other side, as some bright person out there in the audience pointed out, it said Mizpah, which is I don't think we have a slide of it, unfortunately, Gabriel. But on the other side, it said Mizpah, which is the Hebrew for, correct my Hebrew if I've gotten it wrong here, but something like "Go and may the Lord be with you." Originally, it said welcome on both sides of the arch, but it took. Let's go back to that welcome arch, Gabriel. Can we? There we go. It originally said welcome on both sides. It took our Chamber of Commerce a year to realize you don't welcome people to leave. You want to send them with a farewell blessing and a farewell greeting, which is what Mizpah stood for. There was hopes of restoring the arch and of putting it Mizpah back up again, but so far that has not happened. Right. But it's interesting that the Jewish community and the Hebrew faith was active in the early city to put that on the welcome arch. And by the way, the historic district sign has Mizpah on the arch.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gabriel.
There's a story with that. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah, a little louder would help.
Oh, okay. There's a story with that, and I had never heard that it said welcome on both sides, but the other side did say mitzvah, which meant have a safe trip in Yiddish, not in Hebrew. And the KKK, I thought it was removed when Stapleton was the mayor. But the KKK had convinced whoever it was. We had a lot of mayors at that time that were KKK people. And maybe it was some other anti-Semite, convinced the city to tear it down. And I understand they used the excuse that the cars were hitting it or something like that. I got the whole story on this from Union Station, from Union Station, and they have a museum under Union Station with both pictures, welcome and mitzvah. And they convinced them to take it down. The KKK wanted it gone. And I think, I might be wrong, this part at the very bottom are those look like they might be something to block cars from coming in. What do you think, Tom? Or anybody else?
I'm not,
You know,
yeah,
the horizontal things that are just below, or I mean, forward of the woman and behind the trolley. See those?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thank you for that fascinating story. And I didn't realize it was Yiddish instead of Hebrew. And how would you translate the Yiddish?
Oh, it's not Yiddish? Well, my grandson's saying it's not Yiddish.
No,
What is it?
no,
Uh,
it's Hebrew for like God watch over you.
Oh, it is Hebrew. My grandson said it's Hebrew to mean God watch over you.
Well, good for your, your grandson knowing Hebrew. God bless you. May the Lord keep you as you leave our city. Okay, one of the men behind LoDo, of course, is this man. You recognize our mayor, our governor, now our U.S. Senator, John Hickenlooper, who in 1988 opens the Wine Coop Brewing Company on Wine Coop Street. He didn't want to call it the Wine Coop because he was pushing beer, of course, there. The first brew pub, there are now about 440 brew pubs in Colorado, but he had the first one, very popular. And I think he passed out free beer and people voted for him, and he became an upset mayor for 2 terms and then governor for 2 terms, and now in the U.S. Senate. But this would help transform LoDo into a magnet for particularly people like probably your grandson has been down there to enjoy life in LoDo. If you walk around LoDo, you'll notice these decks. Can you see behind the green freight car here? There's a deck there. These are loading decks that are at the height of boxcar doors where you would be unloading supplies there off of railroads. You have to remember these were railroad tracks before there were streets. This is as far up in Market Street where you still have those loading docks on many of the buildings. I took this photo, I think, before the boom, so it looks a little dreary there. Now many of those places are active, and the railroad cars, of course, are long gone, and you're hard put to find a parking spot. One of the many warehouses, this one for cold goods, for milk, for ice cream and whatnot, the Ice House, is now Lofts. This is right next to Union Station, and notice that lovely decorative brickwork there. That crisscross pattern you'll see again up in Coors Field, which picked up on some of the architectural elements in the rest of the historic district. And here it is, Coors Field going up
Oh, wow.
in the 1990s. Built to look like an old-fashioned ball field, and also built to fit into the adjacent LoDo Historic District. So it's made of brick and stone. They deliberately sunk it into the ground and kept it fairly low so it wouldn't dominate the nearby historic buildings.
Leah, do you have a question?
Building, of course, is a lot better than the team, unfortunately.
Yes, I do, Gabriel. I wanted to tell him something about the Ice House. It's more a comment that he probably doesn't know about. It used to be, after it was the Ice House, they totally remodeled it. It had been a building that wasn't being used forever. And it turned it into the interior designers location, and they made the whole district of LoDo used to be the interior design district about 40 years ago, and a little bit more even. And then they decided to make it into lofts. So it was really, I used to work down there all the time. Yeah, anyhow.
Thank you for these stories. Was it cool inside when you worked there? Are you still with us? I trust you were cool as an employee.
I wasn't there when it was ice. I was there when they had furniture.
Oh, okay. And thanks for your stories. Keep sharing them. And any of the rest of you that have stories, I always learn a lot when I give this talk. And that's great that you actually worked in that building. Unfortunately, this sculpture by is gone. It was one of my all-time favorite pieces of public art there. All the different kinds of balls, like Lucille ball and spitball and curve bar, foosball, every different ball you could imagine was put into this. And it also represented the arch over Union Station there in the railroad track, celebrating Union Station neighborhood with a new Mcgregor Square that's just opened just south of Coors Field. This has disappeared. I hope that they found a home for it somewhere else, but it was a loss when it was transported or demolished, I'm not sure which, to build Mcgregor Square on that site. Oh, good. Here's some of those balls. You like this goofball, fireball, ping pong ball, tennis ball. How many of you have been to this great jazz joint? The El Chapultepec recently closed, sad to say. Hopefully it's going to reopen with that wonderful saguaro cactus neon sign out front. But Eddie Krantz, who owned this for years, had jazz in here. And it was a free show, and there was no minimum around the drinks. It was also fascinating for not black jazz, but brown jazz. And when you think about it, the poorest folks, often hardest working in Denver, are often Hispanics. Many blacks are middle class and doing fairly well here in the city. It's fairly been accepting of blacks. We have a black mayor, two black mayors, including the current mayor. But many Hispanics are poor, and they have every reason to play the jazz here. Freddie Rodriguez did the house band here. If you went in there, you'd see people walking in off the street with a brown bag with a trumpet or a flute or something like that in to join the band there. Bill Clinton once played saxophone there at the El Chapultepec. At 20th and Market, Krantz was offered all kinds of money to sell out. He said, why would I want to? I like this bar. Now the Laughing Ladies of Market Street. And there is Maddie Silks on the left. And there's her house, which has been preserved today. The Maddie Silks' Pioneer Bordello. This was one of the most elegant. It was actually built as a bordello. Most whorehouses are in old hotels or old houses or whatnot. This was designed as the most elegant bordello in town. And Maddie there is walking by and see her hand in the silk kerchief. She is going to drop that, hoping that some gentleman, like the gentleman in the painting there, is going to pick that up and run after her to return it. She'll go a little faster, then squeeze in the door there of Maddie Silks' bordello. And you would go in to fetch return the hanky and return several hours later feeling much better after a visit. This was the interior of the bordello. You can see how elegant it was. After they closed down brothels around 1912 in Denver, this was up for rent, and a Japanese group of all found it. It was very low rent. It was a disreputable building, and they put up there the first Japanese temple, the Tri-State Buddhist temple there. And also rented rooms to Japanese students at DU and took in Japanese families who were often not welcome in any other part of the city. Here's Belle Barnard's place. You can see it's just a house converted to a bordello, a house of prostitution for the nymphs de Pave or the brides of the multitudes. Larimer Street, once the booming heart of Denver, the busiest street in town, the best address in town, becomes Skid Row. And again, I suspect some of you folk out here can remember the old Gold Nugget and the gin mill and how seedy and forlorn Upper Larimer Street had become when urban renewal comes along and decides to tear all of these down. Today, some of them are very elegant buildings. We would restore them, but nowadays the idea was to knock it down and putting something new or even a parking lot. Here's Officer Schallbrack, who had the Larimer Street beat, and you can see he's very disappointing. He's disappointing these old cowboys who are there, finally raised enough money to buy a bottle of booze, and what's he doing but emptying it into the gutter. This was an incredible skid row, one of the biggest in the country, and attracted folks from all over, many of them unemployed miners or cowboys or sheep herders or whatnot, heading down to Larimer Street where the rent was low. And the city also had a health clinic and some attempt to care for these down and out folks. Like this poor fellow. The homelessness we have with us today has been there all along. And the answer from the Denver Urban Renewal Authority is to tear everything down and start over. You can see these giant jaws here, ripping buildings apart all along Larimer Street, also along much of the rest of lower downtown, torn apart for the Skyline Urban Renewal District. Giant wrecking machines like this one gobbling up the old Terminal Annex building. Wrecked much of the 19th century city, with a few landmarks left like a Union Station. And can some of you remember this when downtown was block after block of empty space? Here, the block just north of Larimer Square, you can see the Granite building there in the upper right-hand corner. And that's Larimer Square on the upper right-hand corner. Well, this one is being built here. This is Writer Square going up in the 1500 block of Larimer Street. Much of downtown was demolished and leveled like this until new buildings slowly went in the 1980s.
Where was Casey Fine Furniture?
I wasn't it over on like Wazee
Yeah.
or Blake or Market, right there by close to Cherry Creek, wasn't it?
No, not close to Cherry Creek. It was close to Spear Boulevard and I think Arapahoe, I'm not sure. What building is that way in the back? That is, no, I don't mean what building. What street is that? That
would be 15th Street there just in front of the Granite Hotel with that white bus on it.
Yeah.
Be 15th. Larimer would be off here to the right and then it's off to the left.
And what's the lower one with the traffic with the white vehicle and the cars? In forward of that, down at the bottom of the screen.
The street?
Uh-huh.
That would be a 16th today. Today it's the mall.
Oh, okay.
I bet you can remember 16th Street, can you, before the mall?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Did you go cruising down there with your boyfriends?
No, I was, I've lived here. Well, you know, maybe I don't remember. No, it was, yeah, the mall wasn't built down there when I had been working. We're talking the late 70s and 80s, beginning of the 80s.
Mm-hmm. So you have some great memories of this.
Yeah.
You saved some of it.
Lived down there. I lived out in Southwest Littleton. Took 35 minutes to get downtown. Not anymore.
You could take light rail today.
Right. You'd have to take light rail.
Here is Dana Crawford. You can see what a lovely lady she is. She's with Mayor Thomas Corrigan here, walking along that, what becomes Larimer Square, right there by the Granite Hotel, which you saw in the last hotel, and the city council there, persuading them not to tear down everything. Why tear down the whole historic city? Let's save one block and call it Larimer Square, restore it as a reminder of Denver's history. And here's another block. This is a color shot of that same slide you saw earlier with Larimer Square highlighted in the front, in the foreground here. So you did have old photographs and guides of what was there. You can see a bridge over, what would that be, Blake Street over Cherry Creek. Okay. And here's Larimer Square today, kind of the heart of the city, the place where Denver goes to celebrate during the virus. You may remember it was closed off. They had tables out in the middle of this. It became a great kind of public dining and celebrating space. Dana Crawford's dream. It's now also the historic district #1, the first of something like, I think it's up to about 60 historic districts, including the nearby LoDo Historic District. We have a strong landmark ordinance in Denver. I was once on this commission and honored to be on it, where if you designate a landmark, and this is done by the neighbors and by city council, by the mayor, it cannot be demolished. And any improvement requiring a building permit has to go through a design review to make it sympathetic to the neighborhood. We also have National Register designations protecting downtown, lower downtown. Ironically, the city designation, the Denver designation is much stronger. The National Historic Landmark designation is largely symbolic. The buildings can be torn down. Here's a Market Square, another one of the best blocks, I think, in the lower downtown historic district. And behind it, you can see the eruption of the modern oil boom city and all the boom that has happened. These buildings in the foreground represent the original 1870s, 1880s boom. In the background are the 1970s, 1980s boom. Steve Wild, some of you know Steve and his family. And they still run Rockmount Western Wear down where doing these snap button shirts. And that's old Jack B. Wild there, who worked in that store till he was about 106 years old. The street down there, that part of Blake Street, is named Jack B. Wild Street. Steve.
Hey, you got all that all mixed up. That's my dad, Jack A. Weil, and my nephew, Stephen. My dad lived.
Tell us about him.
He lived to be 107, and he worked there until 3 weeks before he died. This is Jane Weil Romberg in Steamboat Springs.
Oh, Jane, so glad you're with us. It's a great tradition.
It is a great tradition, and the street is Jack A. Weil. My mother's maiden name was Baum, B-A-U-M. So my brother's name is Jack Baum Weil. He died. They both died in 2008. My brother of esophageal cancer at 79, and my dad about 8 months later of broken heart.
Oh gosh, huh? Now, was the grandpa Jack A or Jack B?
My father was Jack A. Weil. My brother was Jack B. Weil. My nephew was Stephen.
But I know Stephen.
And that's an old building on Wazee Street too, 1636 Wazee.
Yeah, and Steve's turned into kind of a museum of Western wear.
Yeah, he's done that. Also, just as an aside, my husband's family came from Montana in 1871, from Helena, Montana. Solomon Holzman, he was one of the founders of Temple Emmanuel in 1874. The family left in 1904. My grandchildren are sixth generation Temple Emmanuel.
Congratulations, that's wonderful. Great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. I just had to interrupt when you said the street said Jack B, because it didn't.
I'm glad you did that.
My father's name was Jacques originally. His father was from France, Jack Arnold Weil.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll mute me.
Oh, don't mute yourself. Break in anytime you have stories like that. Here you can see how it said welcome arch on the other side of the arch, later to be replaced by the word Mizpah. And the Oxford Hotel, which of course is restored and still there, the oldest extant hotel in town now, dating to 1892. And the famous cruise room, I trust you've all had a martini in here. The best Art Deco bar in Denver in the Oxford Hotel. Beautifully restored to the 1930s Art Deco era. And Joyce Meskis's Tattered Cover Bookstore. Fortunately, they just moved out of here up to Mcgregor Square into a little shop in Union Station. But she helped transform LoDo into a destination. I trust you've all been to Tattered Cover, our great landmark bookstore. Now has a main branch on East Colfax at Josephine. Okay. And here's somebody showing off a great book, Denver, the City Beautiful, which you should all get a copy of. It's a beautiful building, isn't it? Many cities have lost their Union stations. Ours is elegantly restored and is now the centerpiece for the Crawford Hotel and a huge shopping mall, an incredible, lively heart of the city. Always something going on at Union Station these days. And a great place to cool off in those fountains. And right behind it, the train shed for RTD, with the buses and trains departing here from all parts of the metro area. Here's one of the early plans, and nobody believed this, I didn't, that you would have that denser development behind Union Station. But if you go down there today, it's got to be the densest part of the city. All of those buildings and more have materialized. Here's an early version of converting the Grand Hall. Unfortunately, we've lost those great oak benches that you see here, making room for more retail space. Here's that sign for the Historic District, which stretches from 20th to Cherry Creek, from Larimer to Winecoop Streets. And as I mentioned, transformed from Skid Row to the kind of the heart of the city today.